let's get started right now. Okay. All right. So for today's class, we're going to be talking about ancient China. So let's get started. The first thing that I want to talk about in ancient China is the length of ancient China. Most of you guys know that China has this really long history, doesn't it? And this history actually starts really early on. As early as most people say from 100, oopsie, let's go down. Ancient China started from around 150 BCE, and it lasted around to 1911 AD. So that's only a rough estimate, and most of ancient China actually happened before this 150 BCE mark. But we call this kind of the start of the modern China, the more modern ancient China, is because this is from 150 BCE, so that's before Common Era, or just for most of you guys, just BC, so 150 BC, before Christ. And that is from that time all the way up to the 1911, the end of the Chinese empire and dynasties. This period is the most well-documented period of the country. All right, so why is China so important in the world? We've learned about the empires in Mesopotamia, the Persian Empire, and the Greeks. But why is China so important? Well, it's one of the greatest modern empires, or one of the first empires in the East. So it is very important to learn about China if you want to learn about Eastern culture. All of the empires we learned about are usually in the West, having more European roots. Say Greek, we're dealing with people using different systems. They have more rooted in different history. And China is kind of separate because they're away from a lot of different battles, a lot of other cultures. So they grew up and they developed in very different ways, and in some ways very special and interesting. China is actually one of the most longest lasting cultures in the world, with written history, so history that we can see that is written down for almost 4,000 years. That's a really long time for you guys if you don't know. 4,000 years. Like, most of us are only in 2-digit years, maybe 12 years old. Some of you guys are even less than that, right? So 4,000 years, wow, that's like 100, 200, almost 100 to like 500 times older than you are. Yeah, so what happened in that 4,000 years ago?
Can I say something?
Yep.
I am actually, that's actually real because I'm 8 years old, and 8 times 500 equals 4,000.
Yeah, exactly. Wow. So 4,000 years ago, what happened then? Well, the first things we learn about 4,000 years ago is called the Shang Dynasty, which we now know as one of the first dynasties of the world. So for today's history, to kind of link it up with all of the other ancient empires, all of the ancient civilizations we learned about, we're going to be focusing on the period between 4,000 BC to around, I would say, at most 250 BC. And right, just for those who don't understand, why I'm saying 4,200 to 250 BC is because before Christ, so before Common Era, before our normal counting from 0 to 2021, you used to count backwards. So the further you go in BC, the numbers get bigger, which is kind of interesting. So actually 250 BC is later on and closer to us than 4,000 BC. All right, let's go on. So before we get started and talking about all the dynasties, you can kind of see on this graph on the right side of my screen as a timeline of Chinese history. You can see that it is a really, really, really long time. There's a multiple of very different dynasties that get littered around all the way until modern era. So yeah, we're not going to get through all of that. And for today, we're going to be focusing on kind of this part of history. So kind of the first line of history. All right, any questions on that? Is that Lyndon? You have a question?
Can I say something? I think why the bigger it grows, the farther it's away from us is because it's the word before. Because it's before, not like after, right?
That's absolutely correct. So again, 4000 BC is actually further away from us than 250 BC because we're kind of counting backwards for the before era, and then we start counting forward. So the regular counting after we hit 0 AD. All right, is that Yun with another question?
Han Dynasty is the most famous dynasty.
Sorry, could you repeat that?
Han Dynasty is the most famous dynasty.
Yeah, absolutely. So Han Dynasty is not a dynasty we're going to cover today. So Han Dynasty is right over here. You guys can see that on my screen, right? What I'm drawing? Yep, perfect. So that's Han Dynasty. And yeah, so we're as I said, we're focusing on kind of that first strip of dynasties over here. So Han dynasties won't be part of our lecture today, but yeah, absolutely. Han Dynasty is one of the most influential dynasties of Chinese history because it structured a lot of the modern things we know about China. All right, although we're not going to talk about that, maybe we'll be talking about it later on. All right, let's move on. All right, so we talked about dynasties and how there's a lot of different dynasties in China. But can anybody tell me what does a dynasty mean? What is a dynasty? Okay, Lyndon, would you like to give a shot?
I think it's like let's see, it's like a period of time ruled by someone in the same place.
So do you mean ruled by one person?
Yeah.
Ah, close. So, okay, so a dynasty is a period of time where somebody rules, but not by the same person. Oh, excuse me. Can anybody figure out exactly who ruled over that time period? Anybody have a guess? All right. Lyndon, would you like to have another shot at it?
It's like the kings and queens things.
Okay, so could you explain more about that? So a period of time where kings and queens rule. So what are the relationship between the kings and queens? Are they different?
They're like wife and husband, and I think it's and then it goes into another like dynasty after new king and queen yeah, just take over.
All right, that is really close, but however there is still some differences between them. So what exactly is a dynasty? Well, a dynasty, as Lyndon said, is a period of time. So he's absolutely correct. This part is correct. It is a period of time, but a dynasty is a period of time where it is the same royal family ruled over China. So it's not exactly just one king and queen, and when they pass away, the dynasty ends. No, as long as they have offsprings or children, that same dynasty lives on. So say there is a king that is going to pass away. However, he does have a son. So the son becomes the new king, and that dynasty continues on. So the dynasty doesn't just go away because one king has died. A dynasty continues on as long as the emperor has children. However, the dynasty can end, as we've seen before. There's a lot of dynasties in China. So dynasties end when an emperor is overthrown. Oops. Or so emperors are overthrown by maybe their own people. So when people don't like the emperor anymore, they want to overthrow the emperor. So that's how a dynasty can end. But a dynasty can also end because of wars. So say there is two different kingdoms, two different empires. We learned about a lot of empires fighting last week. Say an empire wins the war. Well, the empire who wins the war claims victory, and the emperor that is in charge of the kingdom that lost, that dynasty disappears because the king no longer lives, and none of their children can be kings because they got defeated. So that dynasty can also end if the dynasty and the emperor loses a war. So those are the two things. So one, if there's a rebellion and the king or queen, so the emperors and or empress is overthrown, or because of a rebellion, or because of war, where they lose a war and they have to give up their throne. All right. So we talked about what is a dynasty, but as I was saying, there's a lot of dynasties in China, and Yiling has mentioned one of them, which is the Han Dynasty. I want to see if any of you guys know any other dynasties. So if you guys can name any of them. Oh, Lyndon, want to give us one?
The Qing Dynasty? I forgot what its name.
Yes, that's correct. So we also have the Qin Dynasty. So that's the dynasty we're going to end off for today. Qin Dynasty is the dynasty where all of the smaller states, smaller kind of cities are united under one great emperor. All right. Is that Yingling? Would you have another one?
Tang Dynasty.
The Tang Dynasty. Ah, perfect. Yes, that's correct. The Tang Dynasty comes after the Han Dynasty, and that is something more of the modern era, where things are more advanced, where they have a lot of the printing press, they've created the paper, and a lot of more technology and information travels faster. So that is parts that we're not going to touch on for today, because we're still trying to focus on ancient civilization and how they are created, why they are created, and what makes a great ancient civilization. All right, I'll take one more before we move on, and let's see. Yingling, would you like to give us our last one?
Ming Dynasty.
Perfect. Yeah, Ming Dynasty. That is also a very important dynasty, as it marks the end of China. It's one of the it's the last dynasty of China, where the last emperor gets overthrown by a rebellion. As we see how that's as I said, that's one of the ways that the dynasty ends, where an emperor is overthrown by the people. So in the Ming Dynasty, the last emperor, people started to realize they don't want an emperor. They want freedom. They don't want an emperor dictating all their moves. They don't want an emperor telling the people what to do. So that's why that marks the end of the dynasty, because the people took over, and no longer a king is on the throne. All right. Any questions about what a dynasty is? Nope. Everybody good? All right. Let's keep going. Okay. Let's move on. So for the past 2 weeks, we were talking about a lot of different ancient civilizations. All of these civilizations have one thing in common. Well, that is something of their importance in geological locations. So it's where they're located. I was talking a lot about this, how where they're located really influences on how a civilization becomes a civilization. And yeah, in the past classes, we also discussed the importance of agriculture. Without proper agriculture, without ways to get food to the people, you can't really develop an empire. You cannot develop a very great city. So, do any of you guys remember why some places on Earth can grow more food than the other? So, what makes Mesopotamia better for human growth and civilization than, say, Antarctica? Would anybody want to give some reasons for that? Yes, Lyndon?
It's because like they had lots of rivers there, and the rivers contained silt, and silt like makes fertile. I think, and then fertile is good for planting crops, and I guess that's the same thing with China.
Perfect. Yes. Great job from recalling all that information from the past two classes. Exactly. So geological locations are really important because of the fertile dirt. Because you were saying how there was silt in the ground and how that makes dirt really fertile, really easy to grow the crops. However, there's still two other things that really matter. All right, Eileen, would you like to give us one of them?
I have one. It's the climate, like the weather.
Perfect. Absolutely. That is absolutely one of the other ones. Great job. So exactly. So weather really plays into a factor in the places where civilization can really thrive. So weather, of course, it has to be warm / hot. Like the example I gave on Antarctica. Oh, it's too cold. Nothing can grow. It's always ice. It's always winter all year long. None of your crops can grow, so you can't feed people. And if you can't feed people, well, you can't have a large population to create a great civilization. All right, we're still missing one more part of location-wise and why it is important. Let's go back to Lyndon.
I forgot, but I think it's because there's a lot of rivers surrounding it.
Great job. Yeah, you're absolutely correct on that point too. So the fresh water, so that's really important. It can't be salt water, so it can't be oceans. It has to be rivers. Makes it very important because think about it. Can you grow crops with seawater? It's so salty, right? Have you ever tasted seawater when you go swimming? Wow. Yeah, it is so salty. So that is not, if you don't even like salt water, why would the crops like it? So salt water isn't possible to grow crops in. That's why fresh water and again rivers is really important in developing a really great civilization. All right. So with that knowledge in hand, let's see why China became such a great civilization. First, let's talk about the fertile dirt. As Lyndon said, fertile dirt comes when there's silt in the ground. And where does the silt come from? Well, it comes from either rocks, sedimentary, so things under the seabed, and also rivers. So when rivers wash over a lot of the dirt with a lot of these minerals that are contained within the seabed. So when the river runs through, all of this very nutritious and very fertile minerals and materials get taken out from the bottom of the river and gets put onto the dirt. And we can see that's exactly the case that's happening here. In China, there is two of the grandest river in China. The Huanghe River on top, so also called the Yellow River, and the Yangtze River, and also called Changjiang. So these two are the main rivers of China. One runs through the north, and one runs relatively in the south. And these two rivers are where the first civilizations in China popped up, because as we said, older civilization needed a lot of fresh water. All right, so we know there is fresh water, that's a check, and also fertile dirt. because these river, especially the Yellow River, the Huanghe River, gets its name because of how much dirt it blows into the dirt. Sorry, how much minerals gets put into the dirt, because it collects so much dirt, it collects so much stuff from the places it has already run through. It can replace the very fertile soil with even more fertile soil. So every year, this river just kind of washes the shore and makes sure all of the bad things get washed away into sea, and a lot of new silt and a lot of more fertile minerals gets replaced into the soil. All right, let's move on to the last point, weather. For those who live in China, or maybe even been to China, you know that China is a really, really hot region, right? Yeah, really hot. And those who were in Vancouver almost 2-3 weeks ago, you guys know about the heat wave when like outside it was 40 degrees, right? Wow, so hot, so really, really hot outside. Well, that is exactly the temperatures crops like to grow in, because they need a lot of sunlight. So absolutely, we know that China is really, really hot, and that condition is met because of its geological region. Again, we know that the hottest part of China, of the whole Earth, the whole world, is around this imaginary line we call the equator. And again, the equator runs somewhere like this around China. So it cuts China kind of exactly in half. So anything around that is really the hottest regions in the world. And perfectly, there's rivers that run through that region. The weather is really nice, and there's a lot of fertile dirt. So absolutely, China was poised to become one of the greatest civilizations in the world. All right, I can take some questions now. I see Lyndon, you have your hand up.
I've been to China, and it's like when we went to my mom's that place. It's basically like it never snows.
It's 8 o'clock.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So we know it's really, really hot. Mm-hmm. Great. All right. Any other questions before we move on? Okay, we can take one more from Lyndon.
Like, how does China get that like this crunky border?
Great question. So yeah, so I'll talk about this very shortly because it doesn't really matter to us right now. This border, this clunky kind of what they call chicken-like border, because you kind of see it kind of resembles a rooster, right? You have the head, and you have like kind of the tail, and you're just missing kind of some feet. Yeah, so that's what most people say. China resembles kind of this rooster shape, and that is absolutely not on purpose. That's just what people saw afterwards. The reason why China kind of shaped like this is because of wars. So over the years, a lot of wars are fought, winning, losing, and this kind of shaped China. And most of you guys know that there is another 2 countries over here, kind of split like that. Apologies if my graphs are not to size or in the right places, but around that size, we have North Korea and South Korea. Those 2 places usually belong to China too, but because of wars again and rebellions, fights, it broke off. So this clunky border you see today is because of these fights that broke out, a lot of fights that broke out, and China conquering a lot of land. Because if you see around 100, 200 years ago, China will probably only be this big. So this part of massive land was conquered and taken within the past 100, 200 years. All right. I see Yilin have a question.
In the map, where is Taiwan? Because I think Taiwan is in China also.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the thing that you're talking about, Taiwan, is actually a very controversial topic. Some people think Taiwan is part of China, and a lot of people think Taiwan shouldn't be part of China, as they're a separate kind of group. So for Taiwan, Taiwan will be somewhere around here. It's not drawn on the map because technically right now it's a different country. They have their own system, they have their own politics. So yeah, that is roughly where Taiwan will be seated, really close to Japan too. But unfortunately, it's not on this map because I chose this map just to show the two rivers. But if it's your own opinion that if Taiwan should be part of China or not, and that we can get into that deeper on. And if you want to stay after task, we can talk about that because it's an interesting topic, but there's so much nuances,
Teacher?
a lot of things to talk about. Yes.
Teacher, my teacher told me about Asia and China. I know about the river, the Hongyu River. Million men like dig with spoons and like have to dig, and then they were not so happy.
Sorry, could you read?
Okay, so I know the river, like a king told every man to like dig it out the dirt, and then there will be a river down. Lots of men died.
Yeah, of course. So that's the same with building the Great Wall. Most of you guys know the Great Wall, right? One of the more modern, what we call the modern 7 great wonders of the world. Last week we talked about, 2 weeks ago we talked about one of the old ancient. Last week and the first class we talked about the old ancient 7 wonders of the world. So the 7 wonders of the ancient world. The Great Wall of China is one of the 7 wonders of the modern world. And yeah, like what Lydia said about digging up a river, most of what we know about China is kind of shrouded in a lot of myths and legends. So some things might be blown up. So maybe there's a river, but it's not digged by spoons. There might be other things that happen, but we don't know. But like any project that's really massive, it is only possible because of great civilizations. Only great civilizations can create these really, really large projects and create these really beautiful wonders of the world because of how much people they have. They're able to sustain a big population and be able to have a very great economy and a very stable government that can control these people and make them build these really marvelous infrastructure. All right, let's move on. So we talked about kind of the geological location of China and why that is important. We covered the meanings of a dynasty, what makes a dynasty, and what can make a dynasty fall. And we talked about the long lineage of China with its vast amounts of dynasties. Well, let's dig straight in. Let's talk about the first dynasty of China, or some of the few dynasties of China. So on the screen right now, we can see 3 of the first dynasties of China. The first dynasty we see on there is the Xia dynasty. So the Xia dynasty is one of the first dynasties of China. The Xia dynasty was founded by an emperor called Yu the Great. For those who understand Chinese, his Chinese name was Da Yu. That was the emperor's name. So he was kind of the emperor, the founder of China, or that's how the stories go. The most famous story on how Yu, we could call him Yu the Great, but a lot of people like to call him Yu the Engineer too, which is kind of funny because his most famous story is about how Great Yu controlled the water. And in Chinese, the legend is 大禹治水. So unfortunately, there are no contemporary sources, so no modern scientific data that can show that Yu the Great or Yu the Engineer existed. And nobody really knows how the Xia Emperor and the Xia Dynasty worked because there's not a lot of evidence on it. Because of this, most people think is just some mythical or quasi-legendary, so semi-legendary land that people made. But yeah, even though there's no proof to say there's a Xia dynasty, but there's also no proof to disprove it, or to say that it's not there. So it's kind of still up to debate if Xia Dynasty is kind of the first dynasty of China, or it's just a living legend. All right, so the reason, let's circle back to what I said before. I was talking about how the person's name is Yu the Great or Yu the Engineer. People call him Yu the Engineer because of what he did. He gained the title of the emperor because of his ingenuity on creating something. He was the first person to be able to stop a flood. And because of that, people thought him as a legendary status. Because at that time, anybody who can control anything natural, so any natural disasters, and if they can control it, they automatically become almost godlike. Any questions about that video? Is that okay? Let's see. Is that Lyndon?
So, like, is that actually true?
Great question. So as I was saying, we don't really know if it's true or not, right? Because it is what we call a mystery. There is no actual facts. There's no actual evidence that backed up that this happened. Just like Noah's Ark in the Bible, there's not actual really sound scientific fact to back anything that up on what happened. But however, there's a lot of lore, and there's no way to disprove it. So it's kind of still a very massive debate in the scientific world. Okay. Let's go back to that. We're not done with that. So we already talked about the first dynasty of China. The first dynasty of China is Xia Dynasty, a dynasty that we don't know a lot about. But the next dynasty we want to talk about is the Shang Dynasty. And Shang Dynasty, on the screen you can see it's from around 1600 BCE, so before, BC, to around 1050 BC. And this dynasty is one of the first recorded dynasties in Chinese history. So Shang Dynasty is actually approved and confirmed by a lot of historians, archaeologists, and scientists to be a legit dynasty that happened in China. And in the Shang Dynasty, what is the most impressive things is the advancements in math, astronomy, art, and also military technology. So before that, there wasn't much of any of those. So there was not a lot of military technology. They didn't have a lot of very good understanding on math and astronomy. So astronomy being looking to the sky and the knowledge of stars. And another really impressive thing that they're responsible for is actually a very highly developed calendar system. So yeah, so the calendars that you guys probably know, with the calendars that we use right now is called the Gregorian calendar. So that will be the regular calendars we have today. Like today will be July 17th. But there's also the Chinese calendar that follows a very different way, and that is what in Chinese culture called the old calendar, and that calendar is based on the rotations of the sun and the moon. So yeah, and the last thing that is really impressive about the Shang Dynasty was the investments in Chinese language. So they had one of the first forms of modern Chinese language, so a language that you and I might understand if we go back to that time. All right. Any people have any questions? Lyndon?
So how did the Xia Dynasty become the Shang Dynasty?
Great question. So most likely, if there was a rebellion and a war where the Xia Dynasty got defeated, so the Shang Dynasty is able to come in its place. Because also
so they vote. So they vote who like
no vote. It was all war, because back then there was not a lot of there is no democracy. So we learned last week about democracy and about how the Greeks and Athens invented this knowledge of voting and democracy. And that is still a pretty far few thousand years away from the Shang and Xia dynasty. So of course, there was not a lot of voting involved in these wars. All right, so after the Shang dynasty, we have the Zhou dynasty. And the Zhou dynasty is actually one of the longest dynasties in history of China. So it was the longest lasting, meaning there's the most emperors, up to 31 emperors. So really impressive. And it ruled for almost 8 centuries of China. So you can see from 1060 to 256. So that's 800 years, so around 8 centuries, which is a long time. And in the Zhou dynasty, there is a lot of better improvements in Chinese history and Chinese culture. The main one is writing and also coinage. So people started using gold coins. You know about how the coins that maybe you've seen on TV that look like this, with like, you know, a sphere in the middle, something like that, that is made out of gold or some kind of really rare metal. That was kind of invented in the Zhou dynasty. And another thing that they invented and made popular is the usage of chopsticks. Everybody knows about chopsticks, right?
Yeah, I've used chopsticks.
So they invented chopsticks. Really impressive. All right, and yeah. So there is another thing that I want to really talk about. Lyndon was talking about the Shang Dynasty and the Xia dynasties and the reason why they got defeated. Well, I want to talk about something called the mandate of heaven.
What is that?
Yeah, I'm going to explain. So what is the mandate of heaven? Well, the mandate of heaven stated, or it's kind of a theory that they created. It stated that an emperor can only remain an emperor if he stayed in the favor of the gods. So if the emperor disobeyed the favors of the god by being a bad person, by doing the wrong things, they would fall out of favor with the gods, and they would no longer be a fit emperor. So another emperor will come along and be able to defeat them. So that is the Zhou dynasty invented this idea of the mandate of the heavens to kind of give an explanation of why the Xia and the Shang dynasty fell. So they had a lot of reasons, but one of the reasons might be that the Xia dynasty or the Xia emperor did something that was bad. He didn't respect his family, and that was something that was against the mandate of the heaven, because that was not what the god wanted. So he fell out of favor. Then that's why Shang dynasty was able to conquer the Xia dynasty, and so on and so on. And yeah, this mandate of the heaven that is invented by this Zhou dynasty is actually really important, even though it seems like kind of this fake thing to kind of, you know, explain why they should be the emperor instead. It actually started a very important Chinese culture. It started a very important Chinese cultural phenomenon called Confucianism. So Confucianism is a type of philosophy, and we'll talk about that later on. But yeah, so Confucianism is one type of Eastern philosophy. There's also a lot of different ones, such as Taoism, and also what we call Muism. Yeah, so those are forms of Eastern philosophy. So we talked about philosophers last week with all of the Western philosophers like Aristotle. We got Aristotle. We were talking about the allegory of the cave. So these thoughts and thought experiments of the Western world. Well, now we're going to be talking about Eastern civilization and their Eastern philosophy. Yeah, so remember that Zhou dynasty kind of brought around this prosperity, this very important era because of their long ruling, to help solidify a lot of the very basic Chinese philosophies and basic Chinese culture. So the first one we're going to start with is, oh yeah, sorry. Before we move on, does anybody have any questions on that? Yes? No? Maybe? Nope? All right, I'll move on. So the first philosophy I want to talk about is called Confucianism. I was talking about how the mandate of the heavens, so whatever the favors of the heavens, kind of created this or started this movement called Confucianism. Confucianism is an Eastern philosophy founded by Confucius, because you can kind of see it's in the name. His Chinese name was Confucius, and it's kind of the basis of the Chinese virtue and also the Chinese culture, with 5 different points called 仁义礼智信. So in English, that translates to benevolence, righteousness, politeness, wisdom, and trustworthiness. So those are the 5 most important virtues of Confucianism, kind of the basis of Chinese culture. So there's a quote on screen, and does anybody want to read that? It's a very famous quote from Confucius. Anybody willing to read that? All right, I see you.
Can I read?
Oh, sure. Let's get Lydia to read this one. Yingling, you can read the next one that I have.
When 3 are walking together, I am sure to find teachers among them. I will select their good qualities and follow them, their bad qualities and avoid them. For fun discussion, I don't know.
Yeah, so it's Confucius. So what this saying is, just like what we talked about Plato, Aristotle last week, a lot of these philosophers had these really important talks. They would talk about a lot of information. They would talk about a lot of these really brilliant ideas, and they would have a lot of people following them, writing them down. So yeah, in this quote, what Confucius is saying is that when there's 3 people together, there's always one person better at me at something. So I'm never the best at something. So that it's saying that you can always learn. That is kind of the core meaning to this quote. All right. Any questions about Confucianism?
I still do not understand. When 3 are walking together?
So when 3 people are, so basically what they're talking about is when there's 3 people walking together, there's always somebody that is better at me at something. So maybe I'm better at writing than the other person, but they may be better at math than me. So it's that kind of thing that that he's talking about.
And I select the qualities?
And I will select their good qualities and follow them, and their bad qualities to avoid them. So basically, if they have something that they're better at me at, I will kind of take that into account and I'll try to learn from them. But if they have something that's not as good as me, I wouldn't kind of, say that, oh, that's what they do, so I'm going to follow them. I'm still going to be the better person. That's what he's trying to do.
Oh.
Mm-hmm.
But that's manners, stealing people's manner and avoiding their bad manners.
Yes, exactly. All right. Linton, let's get your question and we can move on.
Is this a poem or like a thing?
Oh, so this is a quote. So it's something that Confucius probably said during his lifetime, and people wrote it down because they thought it was very brilliant and very smart. So yeah.
I think it's 9.5 smart.
9.5 smart. All right, let's move on, shall we? Okay, so I was talking about Confucianism, and the other major philosophical branch, sorry, is called Taoism. So what is Taoism? Well,
Have I heard
Taoism is
about him?
sorry.
I think I've heard about him.
Oh,
I think
yeah.
Japan.
So what is Taoism? Well, Taoism is kind of a more spiritual and more mental branch of philosophy. Taoism says that humans and animals should live in a balance. So everything should be in balance. It's all about the mind and matter and how everything should be balanced with the universe. And people who believe in Taoism, so Taoists, believe that there is spiritual immortality. So the spirit of a body, when a person dies, joins the universe. So kind of the start of the yin and the yang. So most people recognize this symbol, right? So with the black, with the white dot on one side, and the white with the black dot on one side.
Wait a minute. He doesn't look like Japan.
Yeah, no, he's not Japanese. He's Chinese. So let's talk about the
Why does he have the logo?
One logo.
Look at the Japan logo.
That's not that's not the Japanese logo. That's not a Japanese logo. Let me finish, please. So that logo is the yin and yang logo. That was created by Chinese culture. It just means that there should be always a balance in there's also a balance between darkness, so the black side, and also brightness. So good and evil should always be in kind of a balance. And that's kind of what Taoism, always about the balance, spiritually, mentally, and also physically. And the founder of Taoism is a person called Lao Tzu. Lao Tzu. In English, it's called Lao Tzu. Spelled like that. And the Chinese is up here. So Lao Tzu is the founder of this Taoism and also the writer of Dao De Jing, the first book on Taoism. Yeah, so he's kind of a follow-up to Confucianism, where Confucianism says always be good. Taoism brings out this information on the yin and the yang, that there's always an evil side to everything, or a bad side to everything, but there's always a balance that can be found within the universe. All right, any questions on that? Lyndon?
Well, if they're balanced, why do they need those two eyes?
Right, yeah, good question. So those two dots kind of mean something different. It means that in the evil, so the black, so kind of the darkness, there's always a spot of brightness. But in every brightness, so the white part, there's always a spot of dark. So nothing is really black and white. There's kind of this gray zone that you don't know about. That's kind of what it's hinting at. All right, let's move on. So the last person I want to talk about today is a person that is called Sun Tzu. So who is Sun Tzu? Well, Sun Tzu is, let's write his name down. Sun Tzu is one of the first military strategists in Chinese history. So what he did is he planned military battles. He gave ideas to the emperor to counsel him on how to battle, which battles are advantageous and which battles are bad. Yeah, so there's a quote on screen. Would anybody like to read that now? Let's get somebody else. All right. Yep. Yuling, can we get Yuling to read that, please?
Know the enemy and know yourself, and you can fight 100 battles with no danger of defeat.
Perfect. So yeah, so that's a quote from the book called Art of War. Art of War is a book written by Sun Tzu. In that book, there's a lot of military strategies within that book, talking about how somebody should approach a battle and basically how somebody should remain calm. And this line basically says that to win a battle all the time, you should not only know about yourself, so your weaknesses and your strength, but also know about the other enemies. So what their weaknesses and strengths are. This book that I'm talking about is almost 1,500 years old. So a really old book, and it's still one of the most commonly read books today, and is recommended to a lot of Eastern military people that are interested in military. And it's a book that is still consulted and used in current days. So nowadays warfare. So that is still that's really impressive, right?
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
Did he live 500 years old? Isn't that old?
No, it's not. So the book is 1,500 years old. So he lived 1,500 years ago. All right. So sorry.
He lived 50. That's kind of like a little small.
Sorry, guys. Give me a second. I gotta plug in my charger.
Then does this mean we get extra time?
What do you mean extra time?
XM.
Perfect. All right. So let's keep going. Where were we? Right. We were talking about how Sun Tzu and his book called Art of War, and how he was kind of the first military strategist in the world, in ancient China, and how he created this book that is really famous called The Art of War. Before we move on, does anybody have any questions on that? Any questions on the Sun Tzu, The Art of War? Linton?
Can we read this book?
Of course, it's a book that is open to the public, but again, it is written in a pretty difficult language, I want to say. So it's kind of hard to read, really.
Oh, then can we translation? Yeah. I mean, translate.
Of course, there's translations, but again, the things that they talk about within the book is really deep.
So it's hard to understand.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, for kids, but not for adults. Maybe for adults, but if they don't read a lot of books. I read a lot of books. Well, you still don't know anything because you write and do math and to do other things.
So why? So it's a difficult book to read because of its difficult topics. It talks a lot about war and how to approach them. So I don't think it's a really good read for books, but we're going to be talking about something that might be good for you guys to read. Give me a second.
Then what should we read? We should read graphic novel books. Or we should read chapter books. I want chapter books. Because I already read Charlotte Web. I do not have that book, but if it was graphic novel books vs chapter books, then chapter. Of course. Chapter, it's full of words. And it's very interesting. You finished it? No, not yet. I finished it, but I have a class with this. I think I'm on chapter 7, I guess. Chapter 8.
Let's get the stream going. Okay, can everybody see my screen?
Yep. Oh, I know these 3 people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
This is a
I
very
would.
interesting story. I mean, history.
Mhm. All right. So let's keep going on what we're talking about. As everybody heard before, we were talking about. Oops. We were talking about Sun Tzu, and well, we finished on that. So the next part I want to talk about is the Warring States.
May I say something?
Sure, Lydia.
Okay. Well, there were two men. I think it was this man and this man who were fighting, and then this one saved those two. Like there was a crowd, they were fighting these two, and then like this man in the middle like put the fight away. Like he was strong enough to remove both of them.
No, okay.
And,
I don't think you
and
have
then
the right.
friend.
I don't think you have the right. Yes. Okay. So you kind of got the gist of it. Yes. So let's talk about it. Okay. Let's talk through it. All right. So we were talking about the Zhou dynasty before all of the philosophy and the things with Confucius. And well, what about it? Well, we talked about how the Zhou dynasty was kind of the longest living empire in China. But how did the Zhou dynasty end? Well, unfortunately, it didn't end really well. At the end of the Zhou dynasty life, most of the Zhou dynasty was split into these really smaller countries and smaller empires, which is why it's called the Warring States period. So a lot of these small empires, small states started battling each other because the Zhou Empire kind of fell as a whole and just became smaller states. Yeah, so because of this, a lot of these city-like states, like we learned about last week, like Athens, started battle each other and kind of trying to create themselves as their own independent empire. So this famous period or battles inspired one of the four great novels of China, and the book is called The Romance of the Three Kingdoms, or in Chinese, 三国演义. So it's kind of a Shakespearean-like, a grandiose, kind of more exaggerated version of what actually happened. But most of the improvisation there are real. So it's a novel which is really interesting to read about, but still you kind of learn about history and what happened over that warring period. Right. So after this warring states period, these different warring states were conquered and taken over by one person called Qin Shi Huang, or by the Qing emperor, so or the first emperor of the Qing dynasty, and that kind of marks the start of a more kind of singular China, where there is more of a Chinese entity, a more Chinese culture, thanks to the conquering of the Qing emperor. However, that is something I've already talked about in past classes. So if anybody's interested, you guys can go on YouTube to look up what I talked about the Qing emperor. But yeah, we're probably gonna talk about more modern Chinese history. So anything after the Qin in a later time where we reach that part of history. But yeah, that will be the end of the ancient China talk for today. So any questions for any of you guys? Lyndon, you have a question?
So after after that guy wins the war, how do they? How? What's the next dynasty thing? Is it the same first one again?
So you mean after the warring states and after the Zhou dynasty? Yeah, I was talking about that. So it goes into the Qing dynasty, where Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of the Qing dynasty, kind of conquered all of these smaller warring states and created this one huge empire to make what we really call modern China.
What's making all those sounds?
Yeah, sorry. It's something disconnected. It's the charger disconnecting, but no worries.
But aren't you still low on battery?
Yeah, so there's some problems with the charger, but I'll get that figured out later on. Don't worry. All
Okay.
right. All right. So that is the end of what we talked about today. You guys are free to go, and I'll see you guys next week.